Okay. Something moving through the unseen spaces around you right now. Something that exists in whispers and sideways glances, in conversations you're not part of, in thoughts people are having about you when you're not in the room. And if you've been sensing a shift in the way others are perceiving you, a change in the energy when you enter a space, you might be picking up on something that's already in motion. It may feel as though your name is traveling in ways you can't track or control. This isn't necessarily negative, but it's charged. There's a weight to it, a significance that feels bigger than casual mention. And what's being said or thought or circulated about you, it carries an emotional intensity that might surprise you when you become aware of it. Not because it's cruel, but because it touches something vulnerable, something you didn't realize was visible to others. Some of you might already sense this as a strange awareness, a feeling that you're being discussed, that your story, your choices, your presence, they're becoming part of other people's narratives in ways you didn't anticipate. There is a sense that what's circulating has to do with how you've changed, how you've moved through something difficult and come out different on the other side. And people notice that kind of transformation. They see it even when you think you're hiding it, even when you're trying to move quietly through your life without drawing attention. The shift in your energy is less than #0. 5 is greater than the way you carry yourself now compared to before. It's visible and it's generating conversation. Um, what people say about you when you're not there, it often says more about them than it does about you. But that doesn't make it any less powerful. That doesn't mean it won't reach you eventually in some form. And when it does, it might stir something deep, something you thought you'd already processed or moved past. This reflection invites you to consider, how do you feel when you imagine people talking about your journey without knowing the full story? It's possible that what's being said carries admiration, that people are recognizing your strength in ways you haven't acknowledged yourself, that they're seeing your resilience, your growth, your refusal to stay broken, and it's impacting them, making them reconsider their own choices, making them feel something about their own lives. And sometimes that kind of recognition, when it finally reaches you, can break you open, not because it's painful, but because you didn't know anyone was paying that kind of attention. You might discover that you mattered to people in ways you never realized, that your struggle wasn't as invisible as you thought, that the quiet work you've been doing to rebuild yourself, it's been witnessed. And that witnessing, when you become aware of it, can feel overwhelming. But there's also the possibility that what's circulating isn't entirely accurate, that people are filling in gaps with their own assumptions, that they're creating narratives about your life, your relationships, your choices is less than #0. 5 is greater than without having the full picture. And those narratives, even when they're well intentioned, can feel invasive, like your privacy has been breached, like you're being reduced to a story people tell without your consent. And if that's what you're sensing, if you're feeling exposed in ways that don't sit right, that emotional response is valid, because being the subject of other people's conversations, especially when you didn't ask to be, can feel violating, can make you want to retreat, can make you question who you can trust and what's safe to share. This reflection invites you to consider, what boundary would you need to set if you discovered people were speaking about you in ways that felt intrusive? There's also something here about recognition that you've been craving without realizing it. Maybe you've been moving through your life feeling unseen, feeling like no one truly understands what you've been carrying or how hard you've been working to hold it together. And then suddenly you might discover that people have been seeing you all along, that your pain, your effort, your transformation, it hasn't gone unnoticed. And that realization, that moment of understanding that you weren't as alone as you thought, it can crack you wide open. It can bring tears, not from sadness, but from relief, from the release of carrying something heavy in isolation and then discovering other people were holding space for you even when you didn't know it. Some of you might encounter this through a conversation, through someone finally saying what they've been thinking, through a message that catches you off guard, through a moment where someone reflects back to you how they see you. And it's so different from how you see yourself that it shifts something fundamental inside you. It can seem as if you've been walking around with a certain story about who you are and what you mean to people. And then someone hands you a mirror that shows you a completely different image. And the dissonance between those two versions can be destabilizing, can make you question everything you thought you knew about your place in the world. But here's what matters. Whether what's being said about you is accurate or distorted, admiring or invasive, you get to decide what you do with it. You get to decide how much weight to give other people's perceptions. You get to remember that their opinions, their interpretations, their narratives, they're reflections of their own inner worlds, not definitive truths about who you are. And if what you hear brings tears, whether from validation or frustration or overwhelm, let them come. Because tears are just energy finding release. They're not weakness, they're clarity breaking through. This reflection invites you to consider, what would it mean to let yourself be moved by what others see in you without letting it define you? There's a vulnerability in being known, in having your story told by others, in existing in people's minds and mouths in ways you can't control. And for some of you, this might be the first time you're truly feeling that vulnerability. The first time you're realizing that you matter enough to be talked about, that your life has touched other lives in ways that ripple outward. And that can be beautiful and terrifying all at once. So, as this unfolds, as you become more aware of how you're being perceived or discussed or held in other people's consciousness, stay anchored in your own truth, in what you know about yourself, in the story you're writing from the inside, not the one being written about you from the outside. Other people's words, they can illuminate, they can wound, they can surprise, but they don't get to determine your worth. They don't get to tell you who you are, only you get to do that. This reflection invites you to consider, if you could hear one true thing about how you're perceived, what would you want it to be? Stay grounded, stay open, and remember that being talked about, whether it feels exposing or validating, is just a reminder that you exist in this world in ways that affect others, that your presence matters, that your story messy and complicated and still unfolding, is worth paying attention to. And if that brings tears, let them fall. You're allowed to be moved by your own significance.